Hello and welcome everyone. This is Taco Movie Talks. I am joined here with Matt. Matt, long time no talk. How have you been?
I've been good. Excited that the summer is starting. It's my favorite season, so I'm looking forward to enjoying these few months.
We watched three animated movies for this podcast in celebration of Ani-May-tion May. And I think these are considered like some of the best animated movies. And I think they're like, you have your Pixar, your Disney. These kind of seem more geared towards like an adult audience, especially like Perfect Blue, and they're all kind of very unique in their own ways too, especially like the animation style. How did you like them, Matt?
I agree, they're definitely not kid. I mean, you could say Fantastic Planet is possibly kid friendly, but I feel like they all have adult themes, and I agree 100% that they all had their own unique animated like styles, and pretty I really enjoyed all of them, kind of for different reasons.
I agree. Like just I guess artistically, I liked the how uh, I liked how Fantastic Planet was kind of drawn out. Um, that style I think appealed to me the most, but I was very impressed with uh, the Wolf House or the House of the Wolf. That was like mind blowing to me. It was kind of like a mixture of like stop motion, paper mache, and painting at the same time. And I don't know about you, I've never really seen anything quite like that.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. In terms of, animation style, the Wolf House I think was clearly the best. That's obviously the best is subjective, but and it can be argued what your preference is. But in terms of, watching an animated film and being like, wow, I've never really quite seen anything like this before, it was definitely the Wolf House did that for me. I would say the only other experience I had like that, and I feel like it's maybe just the character design a little bit, is that movie that came out a while ago, and I went to see it probably when I was middle school, called Caroline. Do you remember that movie?
I remember that movie. I haven't seen it personally, but I've seen like the trailer of it. Um,
Yeah, it's very creepy and like uh, grotesque-ish, kind of like this film.
and that's a Tim Burton film. Am I correct?
Coraline, I don't think so. It looks like one, but I don't remember people saying it was Tim Burton. I'm not sure.
I I will say, like to bring Perfect Blue into the fold. Did you kind of get the feeling that that movie, as far as like psychological thrillers, I feel like it had influences that were kind of like widespread after that movie, for what it did, because it was quite groundbreaking, and it had some aspects that I think popped up in some really groundbreaking movies that came out slightly afterwards.
Yeah, one that, for some reason I thought a lot about Inland Empire. And
Mm.
David Lynch had been releasing movies before Perfect Blue came out, but I just felt like Perfect Blue was a very David Lynch-esque feel to it.
I agree. Inland Empire definitely feels very much inspired, and this I'd have to look into the timing of everything, because I know this movie is based on a Chuck Palahniuk novel, and the movie I'm talking about is Fight Club. Um, but I felt like that could have inspired that novel. I'm not sure which came out first, but if Perfect Blue came out first, I wouldn't be surprised if the novel took inspiration from that.
Yeah, because it's got, I wouldn't say a common theme, but there's that kind of uh theme you get across movies like Persona, Fight Club, where it's kind of as if there are two and different interpretations of what's going on. And same with, something like Mulholland Drive. You don't really know, and you're not supposed to know, what part is real and what's not. And I think that's part of the whole, psychological horror of the movie.
Yeah, exactly. And like the backbone of the movie too, I felt was very gripping. Where it's kind of like, you're a young adult and you're kind of put in this very uncomfortable situation where you're dealing with fame and trying to transition kind of your role in life. Like I think it's something that we can all understand, and we've seen like countless cases where like child actors, or not so much child singers, but I guess there are cases of that we're kind of seeing right now. Like that can have an intense psychological effect on people, and this is probably like the best movie to depict how challenging that can be.
Yeah, the first person I thought of for whatever reason, I'm not even like a big fan of her music or anything, but it was Miley Cyrus, just
Ooh.
because she had that Disney, pop kind of appearance, and that's what she was known for. And then it was like in a few years, there was a huge shift to, her making like that. I think it was that like Wrecking Ball video and different like provocative things like that. But she's a person that I think has ended up turning out for the better. She seems like she has a good head on her shoulders. But you also see people like Amanda Bynes who
Mm-hmm.
uh it's not the case, and Britney Spears as well. There's a lot of uh and it's funny just that this was kind of before all their times, this film, but it's like the same exact story.
Yeah, and I it must have taken like notes, or kind of been able to see what this could turn out to be. I'm guessing from like the kid movie stars of like the 1950s, 1960s. And like off the top of my head, I'm not super familiar with them, but I feel like you've heard those tales, and history certainly repeats itself. I mean, you named two, like another one, Aaron Carter, who I think passed away last year. I mean, same same story, terrible outcome obviously, but it's like you see that a lot with professional athletes too. It's like when you're given the world while you're like a teenager, that's a hefty load to try to carry, and I think it would break a lot of people unless you have a really good support system or like super down to earth. I mean, you're almost lucky if you make it through all that.
Yeah, yeah. Aaron Carter specifically, I followed him a little bit before he passed away, just because I remember his Instagram was like just like a one of a kind type of place. Like I would go on there, and he would be like live streaming, and he would be obviously be on a lot of drugs and messed up, and then you got all these people in the comments just like bullying him consistently and making fun of him, and it was really like sad, and it was just confusing, like why are all these people logging in just to hate on him. And you could say he did bring it on himself because he continually argued with them and kind of egged it on in a way, but I mean at the same time you could say he was addicted to that attention, because when he was like 5 or 6 when he released that I Love Candy song, so like his entire life he only remembers being famous. So it's, I mean, just think of something that you've had your entire life and then try and strip it away. It's going to be really hard.
And You know what I find to be kind of interesting about that? Obviously, like the psychology of someone who has such a surreal kind of existence, like someone who's ultra famous at a young age, but kind of going to the people who feel the need to hurl hate. And people kind of call it like there's trolls, but I think there's even like a step further than that, like the people who say like just some of the most dastardly things, telling people to like, end their own lives and stuff like that. And it's like it's interesting to try to dig into the psychology of like what motivates someone to do that. And I think like we have people who have like become obsessive over those stars, and then I also think there's like intense jealousy where if you see someone who's successful and once you have a feeling that they're like on their way down, like that they've peaked and now it's like they're on the downslope, like people almost get like a sick pleasure out of like taunting them on their way down. I don't know if I'm sure that's something you've probably noticed as well, right, Matt?
Yeah, like especially the people that we think like deserve it. Like Drake Bell is the one that comes to mind for me. He's been through a lot of bad things, in the last probably decade. But the thing is that what he was doing, with the kids and stuff, people aren't going to forgive that. So it's like a celebrity downfall that you can watch, and it's like you can justify being happy about it because he's obviously, kind of messed up in the head and he's not doing the right thing. And it kind of makes you happy for whatever reason. It's maybe just the whole morbid curiosity thing.
Yeah. I mean, like, I was like you. I remember it was like, man, it might have been like 4 or 5 years ago. Like Aaron Carter was someone that I had completely forgotten about his existence, and then I saw him on a podcast. I think it's called No Jumper. It's with Adam 22, and he came on for like a couple of episodes, and it was just that. It was like morbid curiosity because you're seeing someone who you remember as being a kid pop star, and then you're seeing him and he has a face tattoo, and it's like you're hearing his life story now, and it's like, damn, I haven't thought about this guy, and now I'm getting like all this like huge backstory of what he's been doing the last 10 years or whatever, and it seems like he's on drugs and stuff like that. It's like you have like, I think it's a good example of like the parasocial relationship, where you feel like a weird sense of connection with these people you grew up with.
Yeah, the exact same thing happened to me. I remember seeing the headline about him being on that podcast and seeing what he looked like, and he looked like he was clearly like using meth. And I remember him from when I was little, and I was like, wow, I can't believe that happened to this guy. But then after that, I noticed he kept going on more and more podcasts. And I think it was because he realized that was what was getting him attention and fame. And it was as if he didn't really care that it was bad. It was just like he was addicted to the attention.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, has to stem from a place that you're so used to it that you will do kind of anything to get back into that spotlight. That's at least the way I look at it with hindsight.
Yeah, and I felt like with Perfect Blue at least, it was like she was stuck between her maybe more innocent version of herself and this new self that wanted to grow up. And it was kind of like, the people or her fans wouldn't let her grow up. And then maybe her herself didn't feel like she grew up. It's very vague. There's a lot of different ways you can interpret it. Like the fans, they want the old, like the old artists. Like people are always like, oh, I liked like the old Kanye and stuff like that. And I think that is a big part of what the movie was trying to say too, is that once, people break out into their initial fame, it's so hard to just recapture that initial kind of maybe feeling as the artists themselves, and also just the whole, everything that comes with blowing up as a musician or an actor or actress.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I'm going to kind of uh, use like two examples and hopefully be able to merge them. But this is slightly different, but also I think quite similar. It's not quite image, but a lot of bands will often hate their most famous song. I think Warrant's Cherry Pie is like a famous example of that. And then I also think Creep by Radiohead is another one where it's like that one song almost transcends what they as a band have been able to do. It almost outlives them. It almost has more popularity in comparison to their filmography or their discography, which I think is kind of that you can tie back to like this one persona isn't what I want to be forever. And there's always a need for evolution in people, especially I would think in artists. And going at like the other example that I want to kind of bring up is another now successful or still successful like younger actress is I think she just goes by Zendaya. I don't know if she has a last name or not, but obviously gained a lot of fame being in the new trilogy of the Spider-Man movies. But I don't know if you have watched this show, Matt, but she was in Euphoria season 1 and season 2. She's like the main character, but she's a drug addict in it. And it's like I think it blew a lot of people's minds, including mine, and I wasn't like obsessed with her character in Spider-Man, but it's just like an adjustment because I think producers and audiences, which this is the most important point, have a tendency to typecast actors and actresses because you become familiar with them playing a certain role. And it's hard to break out of that. And I think this movie it demonstrates that really, really well.
Yeah, it's this weird, like thing I've noticed in with actors and artists. It's like, so when they first start, like I'll give like Tom Holland as one example. People say, "Oh, he can't act out. He hasn't had a good role outside of Spider-Man," which, arguably is kind of true. But then also, if he did a different role, people might say, I liked him more as Spider-Man, or I wish he would go back and do Spider-Man again. And it's the same, with like musicians when they try and change their style because they don't, they obviously don't want to play the same type of music their entire lives. They're going to get tired of it like everyone else. But then when they do something new, they're going to have people not liking it and wanting the old stuff. And so it's almost like you can't win, because then the other side is you have someone like you said, Zendaya, who had more of, I guess, a wholesome role and initially, but then does something like Euphoria, and now you have one side saying this proves how great of an actress she is because she's really versatile, which I would tend to agree more with that side, but I feel like Perfect Blue kind of shows you the other side of not wanting to change into that role. Like maybe maybe Zendaya as a person feels as if she is guilty for doing this, or her old self wants her back, or all her old fans want her back to doing the different roles that they enjoyed watching her more in.
Another kind of interesting factor. with this movie that kind of just occurred to me was that this came out in 1994, and that I think was kind of a pivotal time period, the 90s, as far as like the evolution of the internet and use of the World Wide Web. And I feel like the relationship that fans and stars have now is vastly different than the movie stars or rock stars of like the 50s, 60s, 70s, and arguably into the 80s. And I think like this pivotal time period, like the mid 90s, is such an interesting time period for this to be set because you were still detached from the stars and you weren't able to like see them tweet today or like post to Instagram what they're doing today. But you could also like obsess over them as well. Like you could look up a ton of information about someone. You could start a fan club. And I just want to kind of throw that to you because I do think there's been a loss of mysticism because of where we're at technology wise now that almost makes it like I don't think you see nearly as obsessive fans because they're able to get like form that connection online, I guess. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll just start off and say I think the most interesting part of the movie to me, or at least the scene I liked the most that kind of freaked me out the most was when she was first going on the computer and realized that people were following her every move and they knew
Hmm.
exactly what she had been doing. Um, and so I think the development of like online communities. I remember in the 2000s getting on the internet and the places you would find like fans of a certain artist, they would literally have like a website called, the artist's name and then like fansite.com. And you would go on there and it would just be about that person and there would be forums of everyone just discussing that person and like their music or their shows or whatever they do. But also, they would discuss their personal lives, which I think that, nowadays it's more like you could see most of their personal lives online because most of these artists, I imagine, whoever's promoting them is telling them it's basically a requirement here that you need to, keep up social media. And so, in terms of the relationships I think people have now, it's a lot more uh I feel like what you said about people maybe developing more of a closer relationship or they feel like they have a relationship with the artist is true just because they might feel more connected to them based on their posts and their pictures. But I think that I don't really know how that might affect uh how someone might, end up stalking them or finding or being curious about what they're doing in real life. Like, I just, what do you think? Do you think that, this like type of interaction promotes like a stalker type behavior, like kind of like we see in the movie? Or you think it maybe makes them more satisfied with, oh, okay, like I can keep up with this person and I don't have a need to seek them out in person because I kind of already know where they are and what they're doing because they're constantly like updating their Instagram story or something like that.
Yeah, personally I think it's the latter. Like I think it's like they get their fix and they're able to just do it from like the comforts of their own home, which I think like and whether that's right or wrong, that's kind of the way that I find it. I feel like for like a normal fan like you and I, it's almost like there's like too much information on said artists, right? Like you can find out almost anything about them if you really were so inclined. So the people who are obsessed, it's like they kind of get what they're looking for. And I think that works towards Perfect Blue's advantage in that you weren't able to be satiated from just online. Like you had the echo chamber where you were able to like talk about the person you love and you were able to obsess with them. But if you really wanted that interaction with them, you had to like, I guess you'd have to like become a stalker or something. You know what I'm saying? At least that's the way I find it. And I think there's definitely like there are it might be easier to become obsessive in today's like day and age, but I don't know. I think it can work in both ways. You know what I'm saying? It's not
Yeah,
it's not as
yeah,
easy to become satiated, but
yeah. One interesting, type of this weird parasocial relationship I saw that like really just made me go like, wow, I've never seen anything like this before. Is it had to be like a couple months ago now. That LSU gymnast name, I think like Livy something. Um, she like is a gymnast, and I think she posts a lot on TikTok. And I just saw this news story about like all these like high school boys basically, and they were, I guess, like her fans, or they called themselves her fans, and they show up. I think they still do this. They show up to all her gym meets, and they're like really, really obnoxious and wild in the crowd, and they like wait outside to try and like see her come out, and it's strange to me because it's like an obsession with like a boy band, like a Justin Bieber, but it's like reversed with a bunch of like high school boys instead of like middle and high school girls. And she's not even like a singer or an actress. She's just doing gymnastics. And I think she was even injured when they went to watch her. So she wasn't even like performing or anything. So it's this weird, like, obviously like sexually motivated obsession they have. And to me, that's like, that's a different kind of, I don't know if you want to say scary, but like very weird type of uh, obsession or parasocial relationship, because it's not even like they're enjoying her songs or they're pretending to enjoy her songs. It's like they're just there for, to see her.
yeah, I'm gonna have to look into that because that's actually kind of hilarious that they do that.
It's pretty funny. It's pretty funny, but it's just like I just remember seeing it and going like, "Wow, this is like a boy band group, but with boys as the fans and a girl as like the." It's so strange.
One of the aspects you talked about that I do think is very alluring to this type of movie was that there's definitely like multiple interpretations, and I don't know about you, but personal experience, like when I finished this movie, I was like, I don't have a fully fledged like plot line in my head because there's so many kind of different directions that it could have gone based on which way you interpreted the movie. Did you have that kind of same feeling after finishing this?
Yes, yeah. I like, could kind of get a grasp on what was going on in general, but it was as if you weren't really sure who that I guess you could say alter ego or her other self. Um, I forget what her name was. She kept calling herself something different, but like when she keeps coming back, and then it's as if she's reappearing in like the forms of her friends and the those other
Mm.
characters that were always around her. And so you're not really sure at the end like who that alter ego is, or if it's supposed to be like a combination of everything. I wasn't really sure either.
Yeah, the way you broke it down, it it leads me to think it could have been like symbolic. Like she was shedding her former skin, and in so doing that, it was like those people in her life, that relationship was changing and or ending. And that wasn't, and truth be told, that wasn't like my initial thinking. But when you kind of pointed out that it was like the killer or what have you, the entity was changing, and the fact that this is like it feels like it bends reality so much. Part of me thinks it could have been like a symbolic, the murders at least.
Yeah, I think I didn't really think of the murders as being symbolic until you just said that, but that kind of fits in with the view I was having, where it's like she's leaving her past life behind, and I guess that kind of maybe shows that those people are dying, but they're not like they're being removed from her life, but in the movie, it's a pretty violent death, and it seems like everyone ends up dying. And in terms of the ending, the very end, I wasn't even quite sure who was left.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think what is the name that you were trying? Was it Mima? Is that what they the?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So like the final entity, I'll call it, was that was that like her like a manager? Like it showed up as her, but then when you saw the reflection, it was her manager, I believe. Am I right in that?
Yeah, yeah, that's what I was saying about her. She kind of morphed back and forth to different faces at the end.
Yeah, so that is like I just don't know cuz it's one of those situations where it's like if you don't look at it as a symbolic, then it's like now we have to start I, trying to remember the details. Like, did it come up in the news? I think some of the things did come up in the news. So it's like it's hard to delineate what is fact and what is fiction, I guess.
Right, right. Like the whole all the murders, I remember there were detectives and they're trying to solve like a real case. But at the same time, these deaths seem like they couldn't possibly happen, and they just kind of randomly happen, and there's not really someone that you could catch. You have that really creepy looking dude who I guess is kind of a ghost, but you could say that's an obsessed fan who wants her to be back the way she was. But I think the movie makes it more like that is her, because I remember there's this one little in like scene where it's fading away, and you have, oh, I forgot the name you just said a minute ago, be the alter ego entity like hugging that character at one point on the computer. So it's like they're like working together, maybe like the old, it's definitely symbolic, but it'd be like, the old fan and like her old self, or maybe trying to like pull her back to be that innocent like pop star again. And maybe it's also saying, this is what the fans want. They want this from you, but she herself doesn't want this. And then you also have this other angle that I was getting from the movie, this interpretation where it could all be like a weird psychological event, because it's like she kept coming out of these dreams and this
Mhm.
or these like visions and these things happening, and then she'd like wake up to reality in her bed again. And so it really just confuses you, and you just don't, at the end you really don't know what's real and not.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one of the aspects that ties very closely to Inland Empire, like you said, is the that it seemed like we were like mixing reality with the TV show as well. So you're constantly like in a limbo of trying to delineate: is this reality? Is this the TV show? Is this a dream? Or is it symbolic? It all blends together to where you really can't tell where one thing starts and another thing begins. If I go down the symbolic path more, I think what you said would have to be what I would lean closest towards. And it's like it's the creation of the fans. It's like once she leaves that past as a pop singer behind, it's like that kind of ghost, the Mima ghost, so call it, is almost like literally created in the minds of like the obsessive fans, I guess. At least that's kind of what my mind goes to trying to put it all together. But I mean, did the TV show angle also kind of throw you off a bit too?
Yeah, it was the and also like the way I guess it cut around to different things like the TV show and her singing, and then you have like there were parts where they would go to like different her different fans or groupies, and they'd be talking about what was going on, and that makes you think this is happening in reality. But then when it gets back to like her perspective, it just becomes so much more Inland Empire slash Mulholland Drive-ish, where you think this is like a weird fever dream. And I guess to me, I come away just like really thinking about what we were first talking about with like celebrity obsession and parasocial relationships. And I think maybe the whole movie is trying to like demonstrate what kind of a hell that can be for um a super famous pop artist slash actress.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think, like, I don't know if there's always been this appreciation, but I think now more so than ever, like when you can see the actual interactions that these stars have to go through with paparazzi, like it just seems completely crazy. And we get like small doses of it, right? That's like their daily lives. But I think now you can really, I guess, empathize with them. It's like, you sign up for it because that's a very important part of your career is popularity. But there's a lot of, just responsibility that comes with it that you have to be on like 24/7. And, a lot of actors will go to great lengths to try to avoid that, but it's hard to escape that. It's once you become so famous, it's hard to just be a normal person anymore.
Yeah, I mean, fame looks so much fun from, our perspective. But as I gotten older, especially, I never really wanted to ever be famous. But I've just realized more and more how much like I personally value my privacy. And if you're at the level of fame where you can't even go to the grocery store without, half the store recognizing you, probably maybe even more for someone like, maybe like a Taylor Swift or something. Your life is just, I mean, obviously it's not normal, but I would hate it. I mean, and then you have to deal with, paranoia of you're being watched everywhere you go. And I think the only way you could really stop that is if you tried to put a mask or something on. But even then, you might, like for the biggest celebrities, you have paparazzi literally watching their house all day. I mean, I think that's a terrible life.
I agree. And it's like so much to the point where it's like, I think there's certain personality types where it's like fame is something that they, strive to achieve. But like me personally, and especially from what you're talking about, like that isn't even like to be greatly successful at something, like a dream where it's like you could be an actor, a director, a famous whatever, or not famous, but like a great something. I think fame is like something that doesn't even make the list of why you would be happy to be that. like from my personal experience, and it sounds like you're very much the same.
Yeah, and that's, why I've maybe always related more to, or maybe relating isn't the best word, but um like I appreciate artists like Daft Punk or Aphex Twin or MF Doom, people that hide their identity and they manage to keep their lives so private to where if you saw them in real life, most of their fans probably wouldn't even recognize them on first glance because they put in this effort to create a sort of character that's different from their real selves. And I've just always appreciated that personally because I thought, if I was ever famous for like making a movie or making a music, I would also rather be like that, where I'm not having to worry about going outside my house, where people appreciate this other side, maybe like this music side of me. It's kind of like my own alter ego, maybe like in Perfect Blue, but it's not an alter ego that has my face on it.
Yeah, and that's it's pretty insane that that's the lengths that you have to go anymore to be able to maintain something like that. Um, Matt, I want to ask you any other topics with Perfect Blue that you want to cover?
Uh, no, I feel like that what we talked about with the celebrity fame and all that was really what I wanted to touch on the most.
Let me ask you, what was your rating on this film?
My rating for this, it was hard to rate. I wasn't really sure, but I ended up just giving it a 4 out of 5 stars right now. I feel like yeah, I did the same thing for movies like Mulholland Drive, and I feel like if I watched them again, I might notice more things and maybe like it even a little more. It's just a great rewatchable movie as well.
Yeah, I as far as rewatchability, I think this is one that definitely would benefit from a rewatch and could easily be enjoyed. I give this one a 4.5 out of 5. I just really like the psychological angle, and because we've kind of made the comparison to Inland Empire, and I'm not going to say definitively that I like this one more. I rated this one higher, and I think part of that is that I was able to both digest more of it and maybe relate to it a little bit more. And I want to ask you, I mean, do you have any preference, or do you almost look at them as very much like kind of parallels?
I look at them as very similar movies. Personally, I saw Inland Empire like in a theater,
Mm.
and I think that was what really like did it for me in terms of I'm pretty sure I gave that movie a 5 out of 5. And that was a lot because, I was really sucked in and in that theater. That movie was scary in the theater. It was freaky. And that's kind of why I think it got a slightly higher rating from me.
I can understand that some of the scenes, um, it's like he does jump scares, but in a completely artistic way. But they're equally as scary. And they don't feel as cheap either. If you remember, like some of the scenes that I'm talking about.
Yeah, they're really haunting.
Yeah. Matt, do you want to talk about the Wolf House next, or do you want to talk about Fantastic Planet next?
Um, let's do the Wolf House, then we'll end with Fantastic Planet.
Absolutely. So we kind of touched on the fact that the like animation style is really, very unique, uh, really cool. And I want to jump to the heart of the matter because you touched on something that I am not yet aware of, and I'm really interested to dive into this. But you said, is this based on an actual like a Chilean cult?
Yeah, so I read about it in the reviews and I kind of the description on Letterboxd was like really long and I was kind of confused, and so I, just looked into it a little bit, and it was this cult in I think the '60s in Chile, and it was at the time period where a lot of the former Nazi members were relocating to South America, and it was this guy named I think Paul Schaefer, one of a German guy. It was a former Nazi who started this cult in Chile, and he was like previously, accused of like sexually assaulting people and abusing people, and he basically started this cult and did that to all the people involved as well. And when you know that, the movie actually makes a little more sense because honestly, it was pretty confusing what was going on in the film. It was very hard to follow. And when I got a little bit of those references about, the true story, I appreciated it a little more.
I did not know that. I thought because they make allusions to a backstory in the movie, and I thought that was kind of just storyline, some fictional backstory to try to give a little bit of backstory because, like you said, this is like it's very metaphorical and like the message is trying to get across. You saying that makes this like 20 times more haunting because I was just kind of like utilizing what we know about like Amish communities and how internally they often kind of perpetuate the narrative that it's like you're safer within the home. And I guess, if you're to take the metaphor, in actuality, sometimes those communities can be a wolf house, that there are predators living amongst you and that you're not actually as safe as what, the community as a whole is trying to make you think you are. And this movie did an amazing job at that. And I visually was stunning as well. What were your thoughts, I guess, on how it got the message across in the art style?
Yeah, so first on the art style, I think this was probably the creepiest movie I've ever seen. I could just like say that up front. Like, with I don't know exactly what it was, if it was like paper mache or if it was clay that they were using. But like what stuck out to me the most is the way their faces looked and kind of how it a lot of the times they were like moving a little bit. Do you remember what I'm talking about? And it was like they were disfigured, I guess is what you could say, but they still looked like it was like you were taking a what would should have been a nice looking like happy doll and just making it terrifying, which to me creeps me out like a lot. Um, and I thought, for in terms of the story, um, I just thought this was a brilliant way to execute their message because I really thought the whole, everyone knows the story of the wolf, blowing down the house of the three little pigs. And so that's kind of, and I guess the movie is kind of like, she's banned to this house. But it's really supposed to be, I think, a metaphor for what you were saying that, she's living in this place that's supposed to be safe, but there's danger lurking all around her. And I guess that's also kind of what you could say the cult was like. She's living in what she thinks is a safe place, but, all these problems are popping up. Like there's not enough food, she can't leave. And then you have that German voice coming over consistently throughout the film. Like, and that was the creepiest part to me, how he's like Maria and stuff like that over the TV. And that part was like when I learned before that he was that the Paul Schaefer leader was really into like sexually assaulting like children specifically, like that part just like really creeped me out because I think that's what the story was trying to tell us.
Yeah, to touch on what you said about like the art style, it seemed like the characters weren't human. There seemed to be like a loss of humanity, and they were unnatural. And maybe that was to depict like what the perpetrators or the predators kind of looked at them, like not as humans, like more like as prey, or that they were kind of detached from them. And there was certainly like the, I think it's the Three Little Pigs, fairy tale. But I think also something that I picked up on, whether it was intentional on behalf of the makers of this film, or whether it was just because, there's a slight connection between fairy tales, but Little Red Riding Hood, where it was like trying to instill this fear of like leaving the fold, and how both of those kind of connected is that, like, oh look, it's unsafe to leave here. If you leave the community, you're going to be without food. There's going to be so many people who prey on you, when in actuality it's like you're living amongst a predator, literally, in this situation, if you stay there. And like, to me, I felt like that was just tremendous storytelling. And oh, the last point I want to make is the paintings on the wall and how they did that, where like it kind of, they did visual storytelling by kind of stop motion painting pictures on the wall. It seemed like they did that literally. I could be wrong, but if they did do that, that is like extremely impressive, and that seems like so tedious. And I just like hats off for the, I guess, the commitment to telling the story that way.
Yeah, it was like they designed an entire house of like clay and then constantly were changing it for the film. I don't even know how to begin with like how they get this kind of thing done and how tedious it is, and how many takes it is and how much, stop motion it is. Or how many like times you have to move the clay and stop and all that. But another interesting thing I just thought of was, so like the house itself in the movie, it's like as if she escaped. It's telling you like she's escaping from what you could say was the cult into this new house, and also like the evil. It's like as if the evil continues to follow her there, and it could be interpreted as that's her, you know, memories or her PTSD or whatever you want to call it from living in the cult so long. And you can also view it as that house being the cult itself, like we were just saying, where it's supposed to be a safe place, and it is made out to be this new religion or group that's now separated from Nazi Germany and supposed to be good, and it turns out it's all bad. So I think that either interpretation, I think both are correct. I don't think there's one right way, but I just thought because that's something that confused me at first. I was thinking, is this supposed to be representative of the cult or her trying to leave, but it's staying with her? And I think that the movie kind of tells you about both.
Yeah, that's quite true. I want to kind of throw two things at you, which I guess is trying to throw this into the form of a question, but maybe just a discussion topic. This is something that happens with pretty regular frequency. I mean, there is a number of cults that almost become like breeding grounds, for lack of a better term. And I don't mean to be insensitive with that whatsoever, but there is something to that isolation where I think it's like people feel that they can escape responsibility, and I guess it is because like they run on their own rules. I guess they as their own society, they're outside the bounds of whatever law enforcement is in their country. And I want to kind of speak to that a little bit with you. And I also want to ask you a question as to what you kind of interpreted, because the main character was like throughout the movie kind of referred to as a bird, and then I think as we get to the ending like actually makes a final transformation into a bird. And maybe that is just to explain that she was finally free, but I want to get your interpretation on that, and then if you want to talk to like why you think these communities happen time and time again.
Yeah, yeah, the bird thing was something I was thinking about and I didn't really know. But the considering her final transformation, as well as you see towards the beginning the bird trapped in the cage.
Hmm.
Maybe it's that reference to she's free from the cult at the end, or maybe she's only free in death, which is a pretty somber take. But considering the movie, I don't think it's necessarily wrong. But I think maybe also the bird represents her being like a good soul in this, because the bird, it's not creepy like everything else in the house is. You have all these figures that are just like terrifying, morphing around, and then that's maybe a symbol of like peace. But in terms of like the cults forming, I mean, I think a lot of it is just how effective brainwashing is in general, um, especially for like children or someone who grows up in the cult. And I mean, this is not only cults, but different groups. Like, I'm not going to name any specific groups, but there are, lots of groups today that aren't necessarily cults, and they're not necessarily doing horrible things like torturing people, but you still kind of see this group and you kind of recognize them as belonging to the group based on like what they dress, how they act. They may all talk similarly. And I think a lot of it is when you're raised in that, you are, some people can break out of it, but it's like you're so trained by the time you get older, if you've been doing it for years and years, you just don't even realize that something outside of that exists. Like this like show called Breaking Amish.
Hmm.
Uh, they like have never seen, like New York City. Like they've only seen like a couple pictures of it. They don't have phones. They don't have access. So like it's almost like a fantasy world to them. And I think the people that are in the cult, it's like their worlds are so small, and they're also so neat and organized and like routine. And I think that's comforting for a lot of people. Like me personally, like I love having a routine and being comfortable and not doing uncomfortable things. Obviously it's hard for a lot of people to go out of their comfort zone. And so I think that's another, big part of it. But in terms of like getting inducted, I think a lot of it is just the leaders are have a way with words too. Like you see them, and they're just so charismatic that they can charm you into this stuff a lot. And a lot of the times they're taking advantage of people that really don't have a lot to lose either, and so they're giving them all these promises, and then slowly over time it's kind of, you could maybe say it's similar to like Stockholm syndrome, or when you're with a kidnapper and over time you actually start to like them. It's that same kind of weird human psychology effect.
Oh, I completely agree. And from the people who break out or survive, sometimes, as is the case, it's the what brings them into the fold is like the wanting for a sense of community, and oftentimes it seems like these really good intentions attract them, and they have such faith in it that that it has credibility, I guess. And the more, I guess, questionable actions take place after they're already like deeply invested. It is a super strange sensation that it's like oftentimes the leaders of cults are, there seems to be two common drives, and they're generally one or the other, and but sometimes both, especially if they're able to get them very sunk in. But sex and money, and you see that with Jonestown, where oftentimes like I can't remember his last name is Jones. What's his first name? Do you remember, Matt?
I don't, but I know who you're talking about.
I think it's Jim Jones. But the men in the cult had to stay abstinent, and he would have sex with members' wives, and like they would get so invested that they would just allow this to happen. I think Waco, the brand.
Yes, yes. In Waco. Yeah, that's close to me. Yeah, I've heard about that a lot.
I think there was some sexual motivation on behalf of. It's the Branch Davidians. I think it was David Koresh was the leader of that, and if my memory serves me correctly, I think he had like multiple wives within this cult. And there's the Nexium cult, which has happened quite recently, where women were getting branded by the leader. It seems to happen time and time again. And I think there's one, it's a more obscure cult. I can't remember the name 100%, but I think it's like the Hand of God, if I'm not, if I'm remembering correctly. But they would do things, it would be called like flirty fishing. And like there was this really weird sexual undertone to everything that they would do, but they would have like senior officials in this cult that would sexually assault the children that were raised within the cult. And it's like once other people agree that you have like authority over their lives, I think that power trip allows them to feel invincible to committing those certain crimes. And I think it takes a certain type of person who craves power to, one, be the head of a cult, but also to kind of take advantage of people who can't consent to things like that. It's almost like they're one and the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah, and then, usually if you ever see the members, it's like they're fully on board with it, and it's almost like there's no sign of distress, at least when they're when you're actually seeing them, because you're not usually seeing the terrible like torture or rape that goes on, but you're seeing them presenting themselves, and they always seem like a little too happy or friendly and just a little off. And I think that this is a very different type of cult, and you could argue that it's not, but I mean it pretty much seems like it's one. But like Scientology, you see so many. I mean Tom Cruise, and they're a little more like bribe, it seems. But I'm sure there's been a lot of like sexual assault and sleeping with other members' wives and stuff that happened in that group as well.
Yeah, I mean the whole of Scientology, that feels like an enigma even within the subculture of cults, and what they were able to cultivate, no pun intended, is insane. Like, have you heard? Do you know much? I don't know a crazy amount, but about the like auditing, and it's like you're like just giving them free blackmail on, and like if you ever want to leave, like, guess what the first thing they're going to go to is? Like, any uh, lurid secret that you told them is going to come up. You know, they're going to attack you and try to take away any credibility that you have. And it's a very vicious cycle. And in so doing so, like, once someone has so much blackmail on you, I mean, there's probably certain secrets that people tell that they would be willing to turn a blind eye to a lot of things to keep that secret.
Yeah, I watched. There was a long documentary series on Scientology a few years ago. I think it was on Netflix, and they went through a lot of different scenarios. And what these people do is pretty nuts. It's pretty next level. If you're thinking about quitting, or even if you've already quit and you were, a member that was somewhat high ranked, what they'll do is they'll do things like follow you around everywhere and take pictures of you to where you see and notice that it's happening. Um, you'll leave your house and you'll just see cars following you, and then you'll get to work and you'll see those people there, and they'll come in and complain about you and act like you did something horrible. They'll sue you a bunch for no reason, basically just to annoy you. They are incredibly just terrifying people. And the other crazy part to me is, how are they bribing these people that are going out and doing this to others to keep doing this? I mean, because they can get arrested for this, but somehow Scientology seem to always have some sort of pull to where they can get out of it, or they can get around it. And it just makes you wonder, like, how many people have they converted, or do they kind of have under their hold, in terms of having power over these other powerful individuals, therefore making, them in control of all these people, and then in control of potentially like tens of thousands of people, or however many members Scientology has. But yeah, it all starts with those audits where they say, oh, you're going to level up if you just, share all this information, and they act like it's some weird IQ test, and then it really just seems to be a trick and a way to take your money.
I think what you just outlined is what makes these communities so scary, is that they create these huge insurmountable barriers to exit, that it's like it's almost impossible to imagine life without them. And it makes, when it's a very toxic environment, and I'm sure there's been like isolated communities that can thrive and be like relatively healthy, both like in interactions and everything else. Obviously it's easier to go south, but in these communities, when it does go south, oftentimes the prospect of leaving is more frightening than staying. It's like the whole the devil you know is better than the devil you don't.
Yeah, and a lot of them, like the one that the Wolf House is based off. I'm pretty sure it was in a more rural area of Chile, and it's probably advertised as, a way to escape, the horrors of the Nazi German regime, and we're going to come out here and create a spiritual, peaceful community in this beautiful rural area. And then it all turns into this horrible place. And, logistically, escaping these rural communities, they're just probably going to be like, where are you going to go? And then, this is I'm kind of borrowing this one aspect from these other stories I've read, specifically about camps where they'll send like problematic kids, and when they try and run away from those camps, they'll just find them, and then they're going to get probably the worst torture they could possibly lash or possibly receive. when they bring them back to the camp. So it's like that whole fear of escaping. You think if you think how powerful these people are and how much they've kind of brainwashed you, you're going to think there's no way I can even get out of this alive. And if I try, it's just going to be even worse for me. So why even try at all? I imagine that's you know how a lot of people felt when they maybe started to realize this isn't as great as I thought it would be.
Yeah, and another like huge aspect that it shouldn't go without saying. I mean, it is the fact that they speak a completely different language than everyone else in the country that they're in. Um, and I think part of that was out of necessity. Obviously, the Germans were being prosecuted. I'm assuming that is why Paul Schrader left, probably out of fear of prosecution during the Nuremberg trials. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but I would think that's part of the reason. And I mean, Jonestown, they did the same thing. They think they went to the it might have been Guam, and it's like when you're miles away from familiarity and speak a different language, the prospect of leaving would be completely terrifying. I would imagine.
Yeah, and then if you do get out, then it's like, what next? How are you going to navigate your way through this foreign country? Especially, I imagine a lot of the kids that were, harmed were probably the children of former Nazis or maybe Nazi families that could have had good intentions and moved, but then, all the ones with bad intentions end up being the leaders, and then they grow up in this cult. And I really think if you grow up in a cult like this, I mean, the chances of you getting out alive or with the ability to have any sort of regular life again is almost none.
Yeah, I completely agree. Um, I think even for like the Amish, that would be a scary prospect. It's like your complete way of life is different, even though you might know the language and are somewhat familiar with the area. Um, but Matt, I want to ask you: are there any other aspects of this film that you would like to discuss?
No, just one more point I was gonna make, just about the whole cult thing is that I think that usually the leaders like present themselves as being like a god or
Mm-hmm.
like a servant of God or like a Jesus or like son of God. And then, in terms of if you're religious, think about how, much a Christian, loves Jesus and would do anything if, they actually met Jesus himself. Well, when you have what you think, is Jesus sitting in front of you, you know, you got a lot of explanation for why people act the way they do just from that, I think.
I completely agree with you. Yeah, and that's how they weaponize religion almost against their members as a form to keep them subservient and in their place. Matt, I gave this one a 4 out of 5. I thought it was great. What say you?
I also gave it a 4 out of 5. I just I liked what it was based on. I don't think you see a lot of movies that have something important to say in terms of history like this, to where it's so real. Usually it's more representative, and I just also loved how creepy that animation was, and I've never really seen anything like it. And I think it's pretty cool that it only came out a few years ago too.
Yeah, it plays like it could be an older movie. Did you feel that as well?
Yeah, probably because maybe the art style is so, they could have also done it in the 90s or something.
Yeah,
But I kind of like that. It feels timeless a little bit.
I completely agree. One final little tidbit I want to throw in. Um, it's going to be hard for me to put my finger on exactly why I feel similarly about this movie to The Wolf House, but there was a movie that came out in 2022 called Skinamarink. It was a like micro budget. If I'm remembering correctly, I think the entirety of the film was shot on a $14,000 budget in the span of 2 days. Um, it's a super abstract movie. It's a horror movie. It doesn't like utilize like any of the art style, but it maximizes basically a house to tell its story. Not based on a true story either. So it but I get it's like the spirit of this movie and the spirit of Skinamarink or that creative kind of thread. It feels very very similar. So Matt, if you haven't seen it or anyone listening, if you haven't seen Skinamarink and you did like this, I would just check it out because there's something about it that feels very similar between those two films.
Yeah, I had heard of it and I just looked at it and it is in my watch list. And what makes me even more interested is the ratings. I love watching movies where they're all over the place, and that's this one.
Oh, for sure. I saw numerous people give it a half star, saying like this is the movie that everyone was scared about, and then some people thought it was like they think it could be groundbreaking for cinema or for horror rather. But definitely check it out because it's really super artistic, very interpretative. You kind of have to like pick up on little things to understand what's happening as it progresses and then be able to put it all together at the end. But I think you'll enjoy it, Matt. It's definitely not for everyone, but I think it's kind of one of those movies that you'll either really appreciate or unfortunately really hate. But the final animated movie we watched was Fantastic Planet. And Matt, this is one that you recommended. I guess how were you introduced to this?
Okay, so this is a movie I actually have a like weird memory seeing when I was a kid. I think I was at a friend's house or a parent or I was with my parents at one of their friends' houses. But I just remember seeing this movie on the TV playing and being like really freaked out. And it stuck with me. And then when I got older, I remember I like saw an ad or I saw it somewhere and I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's that movie. Like I have to watch this." And it was hard to finally make myself watch it because of how when you see a scary movie when you're young, it really creeps you out a lot more. I feel like it leaves a way bigger impact. And so, but I finally got around to watching it, and I realized, it is definitely a little creepy, but it's not as scary as I thought. And then another way that brought me back into it was that soundtrack and learning that some of my favorite musicians have sampled this soundtrack, like multiple.
Oh wow. Um, who are or would I be familiar with any of the musicians?
So, yeah, so like if you know MF Doom or Madlib or Quasimodo or Flying Lotus, and even I think Joey Badass song has had it on there, as well as I think even XXX Tentacion sampled it as well. Flatbush Zombies too. A lot of those more like you could call them psychedelic, trippy type rap artists.
I could definitely see that. Because I think it would lend itself to that perfectly. One of the things I really appreciated, and I could see this definitely like playing on the psyche of like a younger person watching this, is the connection you feel with the humans in the movie, and it puts you, whereas like on Earth we're used to being like the top of the food chain, and to put us in a situation where we're almost like like a vermin or like a an invasive species of a different planet with beings that are more sentient or more powerful than us. I love everything this movie was able to do by kind of flipping that whole perspective on its head.
Yep. Yeah, it was it's like a mix of being one of those films that people would say, "Oh, you need to watch this like if you take shrooms." But it also has a really cool interesting story that people say all the time like, "Oh, like imagine like if we were ants, how would we feel?" But it kind of takes that whole idea and makes an entire movie out of it. And it does it really well, and it's unsettling, when like the aliens are picking up the humans and like playing with them as toys. It makes you feel really weird.
I mean that's like a a beautiful like perspective to try to explore. And I can't speak from personal experience when it comes to shrooms, but from what I've heard about it is they oftentimes will describe something that's called ego death. And I think in what I was describing and what this movie depicts is like a really great example of this. And judging by the time period this came out, the early 70s, I think I wouldn't be going out on a limb so much to say that that very well could have inspired this movie, like the drug culture of the early 70s.
Yes, this movie is definitely inspired by like psychedelics, just in terms of the artwork and what you were just saying about ego death. That there's like a realization on psychedelics that seems to be pretty universal among people that take it, that you kind of realize how insignificant you are as a human, and you feel a little more connected to other people, because it kind of the ego death part is it brings you out of thinking you're super important, and you kind of realize that, hey, everybody is a human. It's such a cliche thing, we're all human, like treat each other equally, but it's like that whole idea really resonates with you more. You more feel like you're part of like one single universe, and then it promotes ideas like treating everyone respectfully, and realizing that no one is truly more important than anyone else, and everyone has the same fate, just like like hippie, like psychedelic ideas like that. And that, the visuals combined with the whole background, or the way the story is told, it's very much like an embodiment of that idea in a similar way that performance is, I would say.
Yes, but I think performance is very, very heavily inspired by that same cultural movement. And by the way, Matt, there was a lot of reviews, or not reviews, a lot of comments on that video. Someone, and I want to look up what their name was on that, but I think you would be really inspired because it was someone who's like really into Nicholas Rogue left a bunch of comments kind of analyzing performance in a lot of Nicholas Rogue's movies. So definitely check that out because I told him as we were kind of commenting back and forth that I would recommend it. But the guy is has a ton of knowledge on Nicholas Rogue, and I think you'll appreciate it. But with
Oh,
Fantastic.
he commented. I believe he did comment on my post, and yeah, I responded to him. I think I know who you're talking about.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, that he's like I guess he was writing a paper on it, but he was like insanely knowledgeable and he was speaking about a lot of Rogue's movies and I can't remember which specific movie, but he highly recommended it. And it was of a Nicholas Rogue movie where I think the main character is trying to search for gold. I think I don't know if you've seen that or not. Is it called
I have not.
I think it's
Oh,
called
Eureka.
Yes, Eureka. It,
Yeah, he commented on my my Lucifer Rising review, I think, and he left a pretty and I responded to him, so you can go check that out if you want. But yeah, he's obviously knows like a lot about Nicholas Rogue and a lot of different actors in that whole movement. It seems like it was pretty interesting.
Yeah. So shout out to him, and I'm gonna look up his name while I'm talking. But this movie also, it seemingly has like a very pro environmentalism perspective as well, and maybe even like wildlife, because like you get the sense that we are almost like the replacements for like a type of animal almost. Like the humans in this movie are treated very much like animals. So it feels like the director of this film and the screenwriters were definitely trying to push a message quite like, don't, just because you have the ability to mistreat animals, I guess, not to do so, because there can be repercussions for those actions down the line. And I don't know if did you kind of find that yourself as well?
Yeah, because I mean, obviously the way the aliens were treating the humans were like they were animals. And then you had, it was like the one little alien wanted to, have them as a pet and they thought they were really cute. And then there were other aliens that were like, they're uh, just causing a ruckus and they're annoying and we need to get rid of them. And, that's uh, a common thing for humans, I would say, more among the animals that people would view as pests. Um, a lot view them as, we need to just get them out of here, like exterminate them, and we think of them as like below us, and that's how it seemed like most of the aliens initially thought of humans. And then it's interesting though how they fight back. It's kind of funny because you're like, hey, like that kind of represents like me and the entire human race. What if, you know, aliens were to come and do that exact thing to us? That's always something that a question that pops up in like like futurism discussions or discussions about aliens. People are always like, well, if they came here, they would likely be more powerful and we likely would just all be screwed.
Yeah, I completely agree. The name of the I guess the YouTube profile was Curiosity Tax. I just wanted to throw that out there and a shout out, because they brought up a lot of great points and made great recommendations for me. But I also I quite liked how this movie was able to keep the aliens somewhat mysterious, but also we have, as a viewer, like an innate understanding of them, because while humans are obviously portrayed in this film in a way, I think, like what you were saying, they're almost a placeholder for us in in current times.
I'm sorry, do you mean the aliens, or can you just say that again?
Oh, yeah, like the aliens, we are more like the aliens in a lot of the ways that they kind of mistreat humans. Like there's the aspect that the humans could be us in the future, but also it's like we can also put yourselves in the shoes of the aliens, in how they are the most powerful on the planet and kind of rule their own world, but also kind of mistreat the smaller life forms, I guess.
Yeah, because I mean, you could say top of the food chain, but it is basically has become a world completely dominated by human beings. And several thousand years ago that wasn't the case whatsoever. But it's become such a human dominated world to the point where we have to create spaces just to let like other species live peacefully, like national parks, because if we didn't do stuff like that, then it's like the way human beings seem to think, and our drive to like conquer and colonize places, like small animals and things we would find insignificant are, we don't even think about that stuff. It's like when the aliens would come in and like stomp like the human tribes. It's just like, hey, get rid of these little pests, like we have bigger problems to worry about here, because they're basically just living in their own alien world slash universe. And the humans to them are so insignificant, they don't even think about them. Just like how often do you think about, oh, I might step on some bugs like when I'm walking through my yard? Like it's just not ever a thought.
Yeah, and to kind of write the movie through that lens, it's such a different perspective than what is like your normal instinctual, or not even instinctual, just routine perspective. I think that's what makes this film feel so poignant, that it's something that it's easy to realize, but to actually like go through the motions and see. Because this movie, what it does most effectively is be able to like make you resonate and empathize with the humans, because like I don't know if you felt this. I don't know if this is weird or all at all, but like you feel an immediate connection to the human characters. Like you're pulling from them from the very beginning. Like, and that's one, because they're the protagonists, but two, because they're like the underdogs, and three, it's like this movie has a weird way of just making you like, it's like you feel like you're on their team because they're humans and you're human too. And to be able to put yourself in that perspective of like, well, what if life was like this and you weren't where you're stationed at currently? It makes this just tremendously interesting. Did you feel that as well, Matt, or am I alone?
Oh yeah, and one scene that I was thinking about in particular where I really felt like that, and it was the scene that I think scared me for some reason, just because of maybe how it sounded and how it looked, but where they're making them fight each other
Mm,
with those little monsters. It's kind of, I guess, I don't know, I just thought of this now, but it's like um from Deer Hunter when they're like making them play Russian roulette.
mm.
It's like they're forcing, this these horrible acts on people. In this case, it's, aliens are obviously controlling the human beings, and it's a little bit different, but it's like that scenario of making them do something horrible to each other for their own pleasure. I mean, you could say people did that back in the days of like the Colosseums and stuff, where people fought to the death. Same similar sort of thing. You're making them fight each other and watching these like violent, horrible things happen for your own pleasure. That is something that really bothers me a lot for whatever reason, and makes me, empathize and root for the humans to fight back even more.
I completely agree, and that is a like weirdly human thing that you touched upon, dating all the way back to the Colosseum, like you said, that there's like a morbid curiosity, and I'm not sure if you are like familiar with Dan Carlin. He's done a series called Hardcore History, and he did an episode called, I think it's like gore maintainment, like he's sandwiching the words gore and entertainment together, and like that it's something dating back. It's like it's hardwired into us that we like to see others fight for our entertainment, and to see it kind of portrayed in that way, it's clearly something that it's like it's a sick fascination, and that's like something that you can identify, but the way that this throws a lens over things that would be seemingly normal and allow you to kind of pick up on these nuances to empathize more with these situations that we just walk through day after day. Um, I love that about this movie.
Yeah, yeah. Like I think if I see a fight in the street, I'm gonna stop and watch it. It's like you can't help yourself. But I actually do know Dan Carlin. I think he has a great, uh, great series. The one I watched was, or the series I listened to was the one about World War I. I thought that was
Mm.
fascinating.
He's one of the best of all times when it comes to that. I think I listened to that one as well, and that was tremendous. And one thing I wanted to kind of ask you, and I guess I'll preface it with maybe my interpretation, and then feel out like how you kind of digested it. But the ending of this, in which the humans, they were able to technologically advance, get to a different planet, and in doing so, they kind of found the weakness of the planet, or the the superior beings on the fantastic planet. And I guess the way that I looked at it is like humans are imperfect, and like any mistreatment that goes unchecked now, like we're not infallible, and we're also like, could we have a weakness that could be exploited in the future? Like if something were to evolve to a certain point, any mistreatment we put them through now could come back to bite us. And I don't know if that's too on the nose. I want to see, Matt, what how did you kind of interpret that?
Yeah, I think your interpretation, I would agree with, or I like it. My initial thought was maybe just that, like the nature of like if they're supposed to represent an actual human being that is stuck on this alien planet, then if you like look at the history of human nature, uh, it's kind of what we do to advance technologically, and it's like a feature of a human being, which I think is pretty interesting because you don't have other animals um, doing anything really like that. I mean, they evolve, but humans are the only ones that seem capable of taking advantage of technology and advancing, like what we can know just about the world in general. And so maybe the movie is trying to say, like, even if there was some um, alien that could come and conquer us in a certain way, like for example, how much bigger they are, how they have certain abilities and powers that human beings don't. That maybe human beings will always find a way to overcome that through our process of how we think and analyze and like build and just evolve. And I think that in a way you could see it as a happy ending, as like a uh, go humans kind of ending, which I kind of like that. I think it fits with the film pretty well.
Yeah, I quite like that as well. It's like a much more uplifting ending than like the like forewarning type of interpretation. I want to ask you, because I think this is a very prevalent topic right now, and I think it's something that has been prophesized in a number of movies. But obviously, AI is a central point as far as a lot of people's focus is right now in technology. And while this is more of like a living, breathing type of relationship between a superior being and a different type of being, that feels like the most interesting, yet like with a tinge of somewhat terrifying aspect of life right now. I guess I wanted to get your thoughts on it because we're evolving very fast technologically, and AI is something that a lot of people are scared will eventually overtake us intellectually.
Yeah, so interesting enough, like in my undergrad, I did like my undergrad thesis in philosophy was a lot centered on the question of like if AI can ever become human specifically. And I don't think that they could become human, but what you said about, being able to overtake, I think is possible, but in a certain way. I think it's possible in the way that it can start doing things that people didn't expect. Like we make it as a tool to help us. Like it's there for us to use and to promote our own interests. But then the danger of it is something I was thinking about the other day was how it's gotten so accurate being able to create these songs using these artists' voices that I think, in the future, maybe even the near future, they're going to be able to create entire fake videos using people and voices that look completely real. And I think just my personal prediction is the biggest danger is going to be you really aren't going to know or be able to tell what's real in terms of videos anymore, because I think that with this technology you're going to be able to create such realistic looking fakes that uh, there's going to have to be some crazy things maybe legally that go down to say you can't make these types of videos, because then you can create anything. Anyone can be harmed, defamed. If you don't know what's real, that just leads to so many issues.
Yeah, I that is that's one of the scariest aspects that is like immediately apparent is you're right. Like the deep fake things were pretty scary, and it seems like eventually, like you said, I mean, you could, yeah, I mean, just like national security level threats could easily be disseminated, and that is a terrifying aspect. Um, I think I don't know what my mind went to is that it might take a lot more specialization, and it might not be quite at the cusp, but as far as like what you could do movie wise, I think is an interesting way. Like if you are able to really just put a famous one of a kind act who might be deceased, but be able to see like them perform with like unlikely duos that you would never have seen perform together, but they're able to perform now, and you can make the story whatever you are able to come up with. I mean, entertainment wise, that I don't know if it ever will go that direction, but it's an interesting thought. What do you think, Matt? Do you think that'll ever come to fruition?
Yeah, because I already saw my one of my professors played in class like scenes from The Matrix, and they were singing this. I think it was that Ice Ice Baby song, and they were kind of moving their mouths, and it didn't look completely legitimate, but it looked pretty real. It was like a Matrix music video for the song, and it was just using scenes from the movie. So I'm thinking people are going to start potentially saying, "Hey, give me the Matrix, but put these actors in it instead," or give me a movie that's like this and with these characters played by these actors and actresses, and it could lead to all sorts of at that point, who knows like where movies will be like. Uh, are we just gonna get a bunch of people creating their own personal fan fiction type movies that they want to see, and then you're not going to have movies the typical standard movie being made at all anymore. I don't know. It's a very hard thing to predict, but yeah, my mind has gone there too. That it can really affect filmmaking, and if it becomes that easy to make, where it's just a program, that sort of compromises what filmmaking's all about.
Yeah, I agree. It does. The the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into filmmaking, it seems almost essential to having that like creative theme to it. It's interesting to explore, but like what actually goes into the filmmaking process, I think you can almost feel that as a viewer, especially when something really magical is happening. It feels especially special, I guess. Um, the one thing that I kind of want to tie it into is like, the blue people on the base planet that is covered in Fantastic Planet. They feel slightly human, but they almost kind of feel detached, and that kind of harkens to the AI discussion that we're having, in that, and there's certainly debates as to whether AI will become sentient or whatnot, and whether they'll be able to feel true emotion. But at least where my imagination goes with the type of AI is that there is like that type of disconnection, and maybe that is like just we can't imagine a higher being having the same feelings. But I don't know, like, to your feeling, Matt, like a almost like a godlike being, do you, when you imagine that, is there like a strong sense of emotion in that type of being when you try to imagine it?
No, because I think that's like my one like hope that I would still have is when you get when they've had AI create songs, there's something about them that, like, if you've listened, it doesn't really sound good. Like, it's a song, but it there's like an element of humanity that's missing to it, and I think that's why these like AI covers where they're having a real artist cover a real song is popular, because they're actual songs that people know. And I think it'd be the same with the movie. If you had an AI write a movie, it's going to take all these different concepts of what humans have already you know, put forward for filmmaking, and it's going to combine them in this way that almost ends up being generic or kind of emotionless. So when you have like an all intelligent being or a computer that's strictly rational and logic based, really loses that like the feeling people have with each other, or the emotion or empathy, or what you'd want to call it. That the reason that people write certain songs is because they're inspired and because they feel a certain way. Maybe they're going through something. That's something that an AI can't really take into account, and I think that's like the hope I have for the arts in general being able to remain a human thing, hopefully.
Yeah, and this is similar to like what you're talking about, and I'll ask you your perspective on this too. It's different because they're still written by humans, so there's some emotional element to it, but and I don't know when this became like the norm, but these songwriters for like mega pop stars, or what generally like are really super poppy songs that become radio hits, are oftentimes written by songwriters and musicians who like specialize in music theory that is like musically engineered to like get stuck in your head, or to like have like an immediately like it's like scientifically catchy is the way I'll describe it. And those songs I think get shit on or dismissed like by a lot of people because it lacks, I think, the creativity and the true heart and soul that like is oftentimes respected in musicians who like don't just make songs to become mega popular, but to actually try to say something with their music. Are you familiar at all with like this I guess trend in the music industry?
100%. There's I remember specifically the song Friday from Rebecca Black. She had a guy. You remember? Yeah, there was a guy behind that who had done that with several other artists before. So, like, there is totally this like music theory formula where they can somehow create these songs that they know are going to be super catchy. But the thing about those types of song is they're way less uh, re-listenable. Like you hear it and you know it instantly, but listening to it a bunch of times, you're gonna want to rip your hair out. Where as like a really good or deep song or one that is more personal, oftentimes the more you listen to it, the better it gets.
And not to go off on a tremendous tangent, I think there's still like a ton of really great music now, but oftentimes I think a lot of people consider the 70s to and the 60s and the 70s to kind of be like the golden era, for lack of a better term, for music. And I wonder if like this AI hopefully doesn't keep pushing the arts towards this like cold dystopian future where a lot of the aspects that you kind of alluded to are lost.
Yeah, yeah, and I think maybe why it's referred to that. Um, I mean, personally, I enjoy more. I'd say like '90s music, and
Mm.
also I still like current. But I'd say that the reason it's probably considered that is because of all the how great the live performances were and how it was truly all like humans doing like on the drums, they were on the guitar, they were singing, and now it's a lot more. You can get on your computer and laptop right now and make a music track if you want. It's not necessarily going to be good, but it's probably not going to be good. But it's actually possible. So there's the barrier to entry. Like you don't need to form a band. You don't need to practice with that band all the time and buy all these expensive instruments. So I think, yeah, it's very different, and I don't think an AI would be able to replicate, especially that era.
Yeah, I agree with you. Matt, let me ask you any additional topics that you want to cover on Fantastic Planet?
No, I just want to shout out again the soundtrack to Fantastic Planet. I would personally buy it on as a record or if I could. It's probably pretty expensive, but I personally I love jazz music. I love hip hop. It's kind of a hip hoppy jazz track. It's probably my favorite soundtrack from any movie.
Yeah, I wonder if Criterion does anything like that. That would be a really good idea because a lot of the movies they cover are have like great soundtracks, and this one's very unique. Matt, let me ask you, what is your rating for Fantastic Planet?
My rating for this is a 4.5 out of 5.
Gotcha. Yeah, I give this a 4 out of 5. I thought it was great. I really like all of these animated movies were really interesting, and I think people who are like big fans of cinema understand, but I think like casual fans can discount animation, and I think these movies are like really great examples as to what they can bring to the table.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's a good display of like a diverse set of animated movies. Like you would normally think of like a Pixar film, but you normally wouldn't think of these three. So I think talked about some interesting ones today.
Absolutely. Matt, thank you for joining me, man. This was an awesome conversation.
Yep. Thank you for having me. As always, I really enjoyed it.
That is all from us. Thank you for joining us, and we will catch you on the Flippity Floop. Bye, y'all.